For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael. Good to see you today.
Good morning, thank you. Yeah, good to see you too. As far as the Asia-Pacific region is concerned, it's Japan which is leading the pack, but not by much. Hong Kong's up as well, both round about up 2%. Stocks actually rallying because they feel as though the banking crisis is being contained. I have my doubts about that, and we'll talk about that later. And also the Fed actually balancing the fight against inflation versus a slowing economy and a continuing banking crisis. China up about 0.25%. Now, as China's leaders meet Russian leaders today, particularly the presidents of both the countries are meeting together, investors are thinking, so what kind of price then will China ask if it indeed will help Russia, Russia failing economy and so on, China very much not. What's it going to be? Is it going to be buying more commodities at low prices, buying more Russian oil? These are the kind of discussions that our investors are having right now. Nobody knows what we'll hear probably the normal kind of thing from the press conference today. We'll probably hear it tomorrow. But the fact of the matter is that what investors are trying to weigh up right now is what kind of price will China ask for if it indeed wants to help Russia at all. The TikTok CEO is about to appear is about to receive a grilling today in front of the Senate House Commerce and Energy Committee. What he's saying, and now you know what the worries are about TikTok, that it's gaining access to US users' data and giving it directly to the Chinese authorities. The CEO of TikTok is saying this is not true. The customers' data, particularly from the United States, is being held away from the authorities in China. What he's doing basically is rehearsing what he's going to say in front of the Senate committee. But again, we'll have to wait until later today to find out the detail of that. As far as the United States is concerned, stock futures flat, more or less as you'd expect in front of this interest rate rise. Most people think it's going to be 0.25%. 11% of those surveyed actually think there'll be no increase at all in the Fed interest rate. Meanwhile, Janet Yellen has boosted share prices and boosted prospects of smaller federal banks in the United States by saying after SVP and obviously Signature, saying that the state or the Fed will backstop the concerns of those banks. Credit Suisse. Now here we are again. Now I just wonder if this crisis is really over, because what's happening is that the authorities in Switzerland were very quick to defend the equity holders in Credit Suisse, but they did not protect the $17 billion worth of bonds which are being held. Now, these are bonds which were brought in after the 2008 financial crisis, directly held in the bank by shareholders, very, 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 very high risk bonds, thus very, very high yield bonds as well. But the fact of the matter is they were brought in to try to protect equity holders. Now the bondholders are getting angry, say, well, why were we wiped out? I think we can expect some kind of legal action about this. So the Credit Suisse so-called crisis is certainly not over yet. Russia is attempting to get back, is to try to alter its tax regime as far as energy companies are concerned. And what it's trying to do is to get is to capture some of the possible tax from higher oil revenues that are coming in, given that there's a price cap right now, of course, but oil is still being sold. So the big battle taking place, as we understand it, in Russia between the Kremlin and the energy companies. The Kremlin wishing to recoup as much or get as much tax as possible. I'll take you to the Bundesbank now, which now is calling on the ECB to be very stubborn about interest rate rises and about bearing down on inflation. The Bundesbank used to be, before the EU, used to be the most important bank on the continent, on the European continent. Partly because they brought no inflation whatsoever, and they turned the Deutsche Mark into an extremely powerful currency. And the fear of inflation is something inbred into the German soul. Intra-war inflation will intense in Germany, and nobody there. And this memory continues. Hence the call of the Bundesbank CEO to be stubborn about inflation. Whether or not the ECB will be, well, that's again they've been very slow about raising interest rates, and they are worried about the strength of the economies. UK now plans to raise the pension age from 66 to 68. Now, you won't need reminding what happened when they tried to do this in France. It's very much lower, of course, raising it much lower from the early 60s to mid 60s. There are still demonstrations, as we understand it, planned for this weekend on the streets in France as a result of that. But the fact of the matter is, in the UK, this has been shelved, or at least postponed for the moment, because of the falling rate of older people, the falling living rate of older people. I always thought there was a demographic which was towards the older people, but apparently because of the pandemic, because of the COVID pandemic, because of the problems in the NHS, and also problems with elderly care, the elderly are getting slightly fewer in number. Thus, the increase in pensionable age is being shelved for the moment. Inflation in the UK has risen surprisingly, a surprise jump to 10.4%. This will weigh very heavily on the interest rate setters as they meet right now to give their decision on interest rates in the UK tomorrow. I suspect that 0.5%, therefore, is not that far off. As far as the Northern Ireland Agreement is concerned, that Windsor Agreement that Rishi Sunak felt he'd got is being challenged by Eurosceptic MPs. They'll vote against it. It's suspected today, and they'll be joined by the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Cryptocurrency holders are actually now going to Switzerland because it's felt that their regulatory system, don't ask me, but this is what the news wires say, this is the Swiss regulators are slightly more gentle about cryptocurrencies, and thus some of the crypto agencies, the crypto banks, are actually going to Switzerland to see if they can get some help from them. Oil prices fell today. WTI ahead of the Fed, basically. WTI down about 0.7%. One of the reasons, well, the Fed, obviously, the banking crisis, and again, demand from China still uncertain. And gold's been hit by profit taking, got to around $2,000 an ounce. But given that the gold traders feel as though the banking crisis is being contained, then the price is falling and people are taking money off the table. That's the global view this morning.
All right, real quickly, Michael, concerning this Stormont, backstop agreement and this new deal as regards border trade between Northern Ireland and England, a group came out in England yesterday to say there was nothing in it. There's no substance in this agreement in the first place, that it was just a repetition of what was on ground before, and they're challenging it critically. And just like I said, true to type, because I went through the deal, the Stormont break and some other breaks in it, there was nothing. They just convoluted the laws even more. And that was what they did with the agreement. I mean, what's your take on this? Because it looks as though Rishi Sunak, that a lot of people rooted for, can't get his hand around the problems that were on ground. The only difference between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss now, that he just has a level of better economic maturity than Liz Truss. He's not very bold to take irrational decisions like that. Simple as ABC. Nothing is happening.
Well, nobody, of course, is ever happy about agreements like this. I mean, it's a majority decision. Happiness doesn't come into it. Obviously, this is about political strength and weakness and so on. I think what Sunak managed to do is be slightly more emollient to the European Union, and particularly to the President Ursula von der Leyen. And I think that sort of relationship will probably help this through. The Stormont break is relatively new. What it does is it's only new in very, very partial bits. I mean, clearly the DUP and the unionists in Northern Ireland don't want any power shifting to appear to go to the Republican cause on the island of Ireland. It's very, very complicated, but I just feel as though, or I think the markets feel as though Sunak has actually been slightly more conciliatory, and certainly Ursula von der Leyen's support for him, I think will count a great deal. I do hope it's solved quickly, and what we end up with are green lanes and red lanes, just as we do in your country and just as we do in our country in terms of customs. You know, you go through the green lane with nothing to declare, go through the red lane with goods to declare, favoured traders and all the rest of it. I mean, it seems to be an entirely sensible way of doing things. I'm not saying a mess wasn't left, and a mess will be messy to clear up, but I think they're going the sort of right way. But again, we'll see how the vote goes tonight.
All right, Michael, just to talk a bit about TikTok, I've been meaning to speak about this, haven't had the opportunity since we've been looking at concerns around security based on TikTok and China's potential interference. Not just the US is concerned about this, the United Kingdom as well as some other countries in Europe. And what TikTok is saying, as you've mentioned through their CEO, is that they have no reason to be concerned. That number one, China hasn't interfered so far, and number two, in the event that China asks for data or the information, they would not provide it. But the US is still insisting that if TikTok would continue business in America, then they should divest into the ByteDance, who is the parent company in China, should divest. I'd like to seek your thought or perhaps comment on this, because on one hand, Donald Trump tried to make moves as well to ban TikTok, raising the same security concerns. Biden is also doing the same. Congress is saying that they want to ban it across government devices. There are security issues, but TikTok is maintaining that it's not going to happen. It's the same way social media in America is being done. So why is it different for them, even though we bear in mind, of course, China's laws and guidelines? What's your take on this?
My take on it is, as I said, that I think it's a rehearsal of the arguments, basically. I mean, what the CEO of TikTok is doing is rehearsing what he's going to say to when he gets a grilling in front of the Senate House committee, and the same will happen as he tours Europe and tours the UK as well. And the rehearsal of the arguments is, what he's actually saying is, well, we have this data, but we don't allow the government to have it. Well, you know, if you believe that, that's fine. If you don't believe it, then you worry about it. And certainly the UK and the EU are very worried that, never mind what the CEO says, that the information and the data will go to the Chinese government. Who's to say it won't? The words of a CEO, very, very possibly. Who knows? I mean, that's what I feel about it. I'm just reporting it as a rehearsal of the arguments that he's going to take. Do they stand up? Do they stand up to scrutiny? What's the timescale involved? You know, China is already talking to Russia about. China doesn't go anywhere without extracting cost from it. It's not a charitable organisation, and I suspect the same will be true of TikTok as well. If you want to believe the CEO, then by all means do. If you don't, then you don't. I mean, it's still. I've seen no evidence either way. I'm just saying what he's doing is rehearsing his arguments.
Okay, a number of things, but I'll go through them very quickly and briefly. Number one, China, that you've been talking about. Really, for China, nothing comes for free. So this is not altruism being seen with Vladimir Putin in Moscow and signing an agreement yesterday. But how does China walk the tightrope to make sure that it doesn't attract sanctions to itself, while at the same time, you know, talking from both sides of the mouth about Ukraine, claiming on one hand to help promote peace, and on the other hand, trying to be supportive of Russia. That's one. Finland this week was declared the happiest country in the world, the sixth time. And Finland now is giving out free trips for visit Finland so that people can come and learn happiness. Can happiness really be learned? Can anybody teach happiness? This master class on happiness is slated for June 12 to 15. Do you think happiness can be taught? And then finally, Sri Lanka, you know, has been able to get its $3 billion bailout from IMF. But Sri Lanka's inflation is over 50%, heavily indebted country, is owing China over 7 billion, India about 1 billion. But those two countries have given, assurances about helping with the debt. But 3 billion, how much difference would that make? And I've seen you've not talked about the Fed, the Federal Reserve. We expect the Federal Reserve to come up with rates by 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We all suspect what they will do, but the economic projections, how do they strike the balance between financial stability and remaining hawkish?
All right, I'll deal. You've raised a lot of points there. I'll deal with the Fed first, very, very briefly. The Fed could afford to do nothing and then act in May. That's the Fed done. As far as Sri Lanka's concerned, yes, it's got its $3 billion over 4 years from the IMF, and it's calling upon China and other creditors to be nice to each other effectively and have it all please sorted out by the end of the year. Okay, fine. It can ask for that. I suspect it probably will need to do a lot to its own economy before China and the other creditors, whomever they may be, actually do agree. And what are they going to agree on? And why should they listen to Sri Lanka in the first place? They're not charities. They want something in return for this, and they want a steadfast part of that region. In the same way that you raise the question of India, can happiness be bought? No. It can't. Do you want to go to Finland? You're very welcome to it. It's a very big country. It's also very cold as well, as I understand it. Finland probably will ascend to NATO, and for years it's been a bulwark against Russia as well. Is it really a happy country? I don't know. I suspect it's as dark as its dark secrets are exactly the same as they are in every other country around the world. The Finns can say what they like, but I don't think that you could buy happiness. And your first question was about, what was your first question?
China.
Sorry, we've done three.
How would China walk the tightrope?
China, okay. So I know no more about that than you do. All I'm saying, I feel within my gut is that China doesn't do anything without being paid for it, and the price from Russia is something which lots of people are talking about at the moment. Yes, of course, it wants to speak out of both sides of its mouth. I still believe that what China, I know this goes against what most people feel. I still think it needs to earn a place at the top table, not just by being the biggest economy in the world, which is clearly going to be, unless Africa beats it, which it might well do. But I suspect China is winning the race at the moment, by 2035 or whatever date that people have put on it. But I still feel as though China knows it needs to earn its place. And whilst it's making noises towards Russia, I bet you that what's going on there is that China is looking towards Taiwan and saying, okay, we've seen what it costs. We've seen what not to do as far as invading a country next to us is concerned. What are the lessons for Taiwan? I think all those kind of things are swirling around at the moment. But the one thing that I would say out of it all is China does not do anything free. That seems to me to be the bottom line.
Well, obviously. Well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. Now for business updates across the African continent. Rotus Odiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We're only talking about the monetary policy. You did. You were right. You were right.
So do we put? Oh, we didn't put a wager.
We didn't put a wager. But before I was correct, they did hike. I thought they would actually hold the rate, but they hiked it by 50.
You owe me something. Yeah.
They hiked it by 50 basis.
I asked the question.
He asked the question.
Okay,
that's correct.
I said, what do you think would happen?
Yes, indeed.
Still declare for your boss.
Implications. So yes, the central bank's monetary policy committee yesterday hiked the benchmark interest rates by 50 basis points to 18%. And they, of course, cited the inflationary environment. If we take a look at some of the metrics, they did change the asymmetric corridor, I think, by a couple hundred basis points. So plus 100, minus 500 around the corridor. But the liquidity ratio and cash reserve ratio also remaining unchanged at 30% and 32.5. So those remained in place. That asymmetric corridor is actually minus 500 basis points, minus 500, not minus 700. So look, inflation, again, this is why. If we look at inflation, year on year did climb in February. But month-on-month inflation decelerated. And the central bank governor did mention that during his post-MPC the speech to journalists. Essentially, they're seeing it at 1.87 going down to 1.71. So I thought that would be right, but they said that the inflationary pressure is still pretty heavy, and that's what they want to head off. Now, it was very interesting. He did mention also food supply shocks that the country is facing, because he talked about how food inflation continues to climb. Increase in road transportation costs, security issues in food producing areas, and legacy infrastructure challenges that are still pushing food inflation up. None of this is within the purview of the Monetary Policy Committee. This is all on the fiscal side. So those challenges that you're seeing to food supply shocks, they are what has to be addressed, from insecurity to power. Rufai was talking about the last time about power being an issue when it comes to storing perishable goods. And the fact that about 96-97% of goods are moved by road, hardly by rail. So this is all on the fiscal side, and they were sure to mention it. They now went to their GDP projections for the country for 2023. IMF 3.2, federal government through the Ministry of Finance 3.2, CBN at 3.0. I think this might come under because of what we're going to be facing later this year. He also talked about fuel subsidies and how he expects fuel subsidies to be removed later. But interestingly enough, what does this mean for the average Nigerian? Borrowing costs are going to climb. And I actually want to bring in a conversation that we had during the election coverage with the governor of Delta State, Dr. Ifeanyi Okowa. Here's what he said about interest rates, because we're talking about the metrics of Delta and so on. Listen to what he said.
Industries and enable them to grow. We also know that we have issues with the financial sector and the fact that we are not able to get funds at cheap cost. So industries are finding it difficult to survive. We're trying to grow the micro and small industries. We are succeeding to some extent, but it is really getting difficult because people cannot have funds to borrow. And when the funds are available, they are at very high cost. So industries can't just grow. Lagos, yes, you may see people exiting to Lagos, but I think that is reducing quite a lot in very recent times, usually most likely now from Delta State.
Yeah, so there he is talking about how access to funds are an issue for MSMEs, and when they are actually able to get access to them, the interest rates are incredibly high. You cannot have growth in an economy, healthy growth, if businesses and individuals are not able to access credit and are not able to use that credit for themselves. The credit is what pushes the United States, much of the West. So that's where we are. That's where we are right now. So
that's a sad reality, Rotus. But I knew they were going to raise rates because you're fighting two things. Yes, you need that economic push. I like to use the word the economic fecundity. You need the economic push. You need credit to come in. But we're in dire straits. Inflation is eating so deep, and we forget that the poor pays a tax. It's called inflation. So you are paying heavily that tax, and since it's creaming away all you're earning, then it's a big problem. So what inflation has done to you, for you to be able to understand how inflation affects you, is the fact that what 100,000 could buy you 5 years ago, it can't buy you that any longer today. So if you were earning 100,000 5 years ago, what it was going to provide for you is far different from what it's going to provide for you today. And that's what inflation simply is. And now, the real inflation is even higher than that 20-something% that the MBS keeps touting, because you feel the real effect of inflation when you go to the market, the way prices increase, And that's why when you look at the CPIs, the Consumer Price Index and things like that, it's a far cry from what is really touted in the MBS figures, honestly.
But then is it working, Rufai? Because inflation continues to climb. And as he mentioned,
the truth is, the textbook antidote to inflation is hiking rates. It works when you have the fiscal, the fiscal conditions right. The legacy conditions right. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. But the problem with Nigeria, why it's not working, is the fact that we don't have the other condition right. You still have deficit of infrastructure. You can't still move food around. There's no appropriate infrastructure and all of that. There's no rail effectively to be able to move these things around. But I'm happy, that's why President Buhari has signed that law into being now, that state governments can control rail and power and things like that, so that with that we can be able to move up and increase the economy. And that's why, Rotus, we're also talking about honesty and integrity and quelling injustice in this election. You are talking about credit. The quickest mover of credit to any economy is justice, societal justice.
True.
That's
True.
why people that their heads were broken in this election must get justice. Because you see, when you are breaking people's head, you forget that investors look at things. And like they say, investors are cowards. They will not bring their money where it's not safe.
The LIRS sending out tax
Yes,
notices?
you are sending out tax returns after those are things and the economy is at an all-time low. And that's why you see that FDI is dropping because people don't want to bring their money to Nigeria. Yes, there's potential on ground, but you have not made the society sane enough to be able to attract money. So what do? They are taking their money to Rwanda. They are taking their money to Ghana.
That I think the CBN governor, the point that he made, is that, look, they have had to tighten rates further because of rising inflation, now 21.92 or so percent.
Yep, that's correct.
Because of unpredictable climatic conditions, because of foreign exchange pressures, and because also of rising prices of everything, including energy. But he sounded a note of warning that this tightening is going to continue. This is the second time that the CBN will raise rates this year. What that means, in my view, is that, look, Nigerians should prepare for greater hardship.
I agree.
And he made a point that one of the considerations is that by May 29, this administration is going to remove fuel subsidy. And I ask the question, well, why that may appeal to many analysts. How is he so sure? But, this is the contest. And since last year, of course, the CBN and the MPC have moved from an accommodative stance to the hawkish stance.
Indeed.
In real terms, it translates into higher cost of funds and for businesses and for individuals, the ordinary man. But the other thing that he said is that Nigerian banks are healthy. Well, how healthy are Nigerian banks? Because one of the concerns in the US today is that if the Federal Reserve raises rates, what is it going to do about financial stability, about the health of banks? Will raising rates not affect the health of banks? But here in Nigeria, the CBN governor says our banks are healthy. Finally, I wanted you to comment very briefly on Minister Issa Pantami, the Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, saying Nigerians will no longer have to pay that 5% telecom tax that President Buhari said drop it. It was introduced in May, approved by the president, suspended in September. Now, March 6, we're told the president had already given approval. Because there are already 41 taxes within the digital economy. And that you don't need to put tax on recharge cards anymore. Should we be dancing?
No, it's good. It's a good move, Doctor, but it's only 5%. Reduce the cost of doing business for telcos. They spend a lot on power, keeping their masts up and so on and so forth. So that's the main thing.
Absolutely. Just very quickly, I think it's important to mention that he also apologized for the poor service. While saying that Nigerian banks are quite strong, he also apologized for the poor service in terms of internet transactions.
Okay, you mean the CBN governor, right?
CBN governor during the MPC meeting, that following the lack of cash in society. And I thought it was important to mention that because KPMG just also released a report talking about the fact that the Naira redesign did not positively affect the rate of inflation, as we talked about last week, and just corroborating what you had said last week, that despite what we're expecting to see a decrease in inflation, instead we have a 17-year high of 21%. Just to mention that and just say they are sorry, and so they've acknowledged, and that I hope that we would improve infrastructure going forward.
Thank you, Rotus.
Thank you so much. Thank you.